We're off. Oh dear. Well, here goes nothing.
Hello, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to Travel Tales from Beyond the Brochure, a podcast looking at unfamiliar places across the world and aspects of travelling you may never have thought of. I'm your host, the Barefoot Backpacker, a middle-aged Denby with a passion for offbeat travel, history, culture, and the whys behind travel itself. So join with me as we venture beyond the brochure. Hello. That was an accidental series break, unexpected, and caused because some stuff happened, some stuff didn't happen, and I went on holiday in the middle of it all. I'll do a proper housekeeping catch-up next time, because this episode is already overrunning as it is. But in summary, I've been to 99 countries, insert your own parody song lyric here. I've started the process for getting an ADHD diagnosis. I read some old pen pal letters on stage to an audience of queers. And I've made some long-form YouTube videos, including one filmed while on this very run I'm describing in this pod. My hair is still purple, I still live in Yorkshire, and I've remembered the delights of fresh strawberries. This was the episode I was planning on recording this time 2 months ago, but didn't. And I think I'm glad I didn't, because it allowed me more time to process things about it. I had planned on finishing off with an interview with a friend who has done a few ultramarathons before, but they are also getting a diagnosis for ADHD, so expect that interview to happen sometime in 2027. So, I ran an ultramarathon because I'm an adult with poor decision-making skills who's easily influenced and who might be going through some kind of midlife crisis. And it was cheaper than estrogen gel. This podcast is very much, I did this thing, so you don't have to, and talking about all the ways not to run one, so you, dear listener, can make better choices. Which, let's be real, is not hard. I have spoken previously about my original intent and motivation to do this, but in case you don't recall, back in 2019 I drew up a list of all the things I could do with my life, which included such delights as stand-up comedy and self-defence classes. Anywho, one item on the list was do an ultramarathon. I think it's related to when I was hiking across country and we got overtaken on the Pennine Way by the summer spine race, people running 260-odd miles in 80 hours at an average speed less than my standard walking pace. And I guess somewhere in the back of my mind I just found that interesting. You know, if I'm walking anyway, the challenge would be knowing when to stop and how far I could push myself until I needed to. Anyway, I never thought any more about it until at the suggestion of my great friend Shauna, I joined an online queer running group. Not going to lie, Shauna's a bit of an icon and role model for me, and sometimes I fangirl over them. This online queer running group, a group online for queer people who run, not a group who run queerly through cyberspace, although they certainly would if they could, is filled with people who enjoy running and cover all levels, abilities and distances. However, there is very definitely a strong core of them who appreciate the longer distances and who are always talking about ultras. And they, as a whole, are very affirming and validating, possibly dangerously so. It may come as no surprise, therefore, that I tentatively broached the subject of my doing an ultra, and they were definitely persuasive, that's for sure. The ultra in question was the Calderdale Way Ultra, a route covering the entirety of the Calderdale Way, long-distance footpath, which is approximately 50 miles or 80 kilometres. It basically runs around the edge of the borough of Calderdale, the administrative area I currently live in, so it's very much on my doorstep. Indeed, a very small part of the route, and one of the checkpoints, is on one of the local routes I regularly jog. This meant that I knew the terrain and the topography relatively well. It also meant that I knew just what a challenge it was going to be, because if there's one thing Calderdale is noted for, it's that it's not flat. In addition, there was both a 50-mile and a 30-mile option for this ultra, the shorter route covering just the south and the west sides of the loop, equally as hilly, but less of it. And of course, I didn't do that because I didn't think 30 miles would be as much of a challenge, and I wanted it to feel like I was doing an achievement. This, dear listener, was a mistake one in this whole charabang. If you're planning on doing an ultra for the first time, make it an easy one. The month before this ultra, there was a 32-miler along the canal in Calderdale from Manchester to Sowerby Bridge. Canals are, by definition, mostly flat. 32 miles is much shorter than 50 miles. That would have been far more sensible, but no, Nell had to go in and go hard, because Nell wanted a challenge. Don't be like Nell. But before we talk about my experiences, my lessons learned and my hints and tips, let's start at the very beginning. What is an ultra? And what does an average ultra look and feel like? What would you expect to see if you do one? In simple terms, an ultramarathon is officially regarded as anything longer than 1 inch over marathon distance. This, of course, means in practical terms, unless you start at the start line, anyone who's ever ran a marathon has technically done an ultramarathon distance, but that's by the by. I guess what I mean is that ultras aren't always the horrendously long multi-day events that many people often perceive them to be. Now, that's not to say that they're not. Many of the ultras in the UK are based around, if not exactly following, one of our many long-distance footpaths or trails, which makes the races more or less as long as the trail is, or a proportion thereof. One race day will often consist of different races along various fixed lengths, meaning you can choose a shorter or a longer challenge. The Calderdale Way, as I say, it's about 50 miles, is one of the shorter long-distance footpaths in the UK. The Hadrian's Wall Path, a very popular hiking route that crosses England over rolling hills once patrolled by Roman soldiers at the end of the world, is around 84 miles and has an ultra that my current line manager attempted just last month. This, by the way, is almost exactly the same length as the Norfolk Coast Path, which I hiked at the start of my route across the country in 2019, and would make a much better ultra, being about as flat as you can get in this country for that distance. At the upper end, the Pennine Way is 250 plus miles, and its spine race is possibly the pinnacle of ultras in the UK. That said, some ultras exist either as cobbling together of footpaths and roads, or as a point-to-point along a particular designated route that isn't a footpath, like the Canal Ultra I mentioned earlier, which is 32 miles long, because that's how long the canal is. Regardless of the length, many of them start really early in the morning. 6 a.m. isn't unusual. This is, I guess, to maximise daylight running, at least for the shorter races. I'll come on to more of the admin around this in a moment, but first I want to talk a little about how a race is constructed logistically, as this framework is important. While the route might well be 50, 30, 100 miles, whatever, it's not a case of they start you off and let you go. At regular intervals, the distance between them varies depending on the length of the overall route, but for 50 miles and above, there tend to be at least 6 or 7 of them roughly proportionately spaced. There are checkpoints. These serve two purposes: to ensure that each runner is safe and well, and provide a means to pull them out of the race if they're not, and as refreshment stations. The provenance of those depend largely on the race funding and the number of volunteers. But if you think about those tables with water bottles you see in televised marathons where runners jog past and grab their drink as they pass, these are not like that. Rather, they're larger, possibly more than one table, covered with juice, sugary drinks, cake, sweets, basically any calorific food that you can imagine, because you're going to need it. There's also no limit to the amount of food and drink you can have, just be reasonable about it. In fact, the chances are your body will reject what you try and put into it long before you ever need to worry about greed. You can spend as little or as long a time as you like here, pass through for just long enough to register your presence, or stay for 10, 15 minutes, however long you need. One thing to bear in mind, though, is that ultras have a defined maximum time to complete, and over a certain length they'll also have cut-off times partway round. If you don't reach one of the designated checkpoints in time, then you will be pulled out of the race when you reached it, and classified as DNF, did not finish. As a runner, you can also voluntarily pull yourself out of the race at any checkpoint, Just speak to the volunteers there and they'll record your decision. It's made very clear that you shouldn't drop out of the race outside of a checkpoint unless absolutely necessary, as otherwise you might be deemed as lost and the marshals might have to look for you. For my race, the final cut-off was 17 hours, while at checkpoint 5, around 35 miles in, there was a secondary cut-off of 12 hours. As part of the safety instructions, you need to start the race with a fully charged mobile phone, and you and the race director, or designated admin official, need to swap numbers. That way you can both keep in touch with other in case of emergencies or other issues. This is especially pertinent if your route takes you through more remote countrysides where the chances of passers-by being able to help you in case of injury or whatnot are much lower. And this leads me on to another important aspect of ultras, the kit list. Every ultra has a list of kit that you need to carry with you. Longer ultras allow you to drop some of it off at a checkpoint partway along, so you're not having to carry it all for the whole race, but it is obligatory that you at least have it. Before the race starts, you'll check in and register your arrival. This is to make sure that you're here, that you are who you say you are, and to collect your race number, and to prove to the marshals that you have everything on the designated kit list. Some runners have a bit of a, "Oh, do I really need this?" about it, but it is genuinely for your own safety. For the ultra that I did, aside from the mobile phone, the kit list comprised of a map showing the course. At some ultras you can buy one at the registration desks, but these are often less detailed than the proper ones, like, for instance, in the UK, those produced by the Ordnance Survey. A compass, a whistle for attracting attention if you need help, a head torch, hat and gloves, spare clothing for base layers, likely long sleeves and ideally something else with long legs, a waterproof jacket and trousers with taped seams, a foil or bivvy blanket, a basic first aid kit, a refillable water bottle, at least 500ml, some snack food, a waterproof cup for juice, hot drinks, etc. at the refreshment stations, and, ideally, a battery pack or some kind of charging device. This all means you're going to have to run with a small backpack. In my experience, it's not as heavy as you might imagine. Most of the required kit is quite small, to be fair, and the base layers are likely to be light. But if you're not used to running with a backpack in the first place, it might be something that you need to think about in your training. I said earlier that most ultras start early doors. The Calderdale Way Ultra started at 7 a.m. on a Saturday in late April at just over 51 degrees north. This meant that sunset was around 8:30 p.m. and it was dark around 9. Remember that the cut-off time for the end of my 50-mile race was midnight, meaning you had 17 hours to get around. This works out at a minimum average speed of about 3 miles an hour, 5 kilometres an hour, or a roughly average walking pace. Given mine was at the shorter end of average length, this means that if you're going to do an ultra, there's a fair chance you'll be finishing in the dark. Hence the head torch, hence the whistle, hence the warmer clothing. And it also means that if you have a problem in the dark on the moorlands, you've got the foil and bivvy bag to keep you warm in case you need it while you're waiting for help. This is all because, especially at that point, you're going to be quite tired, you're going to be quite low on essential minerals and vitamins, regardless of what you do at the refreshment stations. Much of that obligatory kit you're probably not going to need, but the fact that you have it could be the difference between life and death. The other thing most ultras have, mostly for safety reasons, but partly also for the same reason websites like Flight Radar 24 are so popular, are trackers. These are electronic boxes preloaded with your race number that transmit your location back to the race admin, so they can see if you're going off route or appear to have an issue. They can then call you on the mobile phone that you gave them the number for to check to make sure that nothing's gone wrong. They're trackable through a website that's public access though, which means all your friends and family can also track how far you've gone at any given point, and also where you are in relation to anyone else, so they can tell if you're leading or bringing up the rear or catching up on someone who's flagging. Aside from that, it's very much just a case of simply putting one foot in front of the other for as long as you possibly can. One thing that cannot be overemphasised enough, though, is, while it's called a race, and I refer to jogging a lot in this episode, you will not be expected to run it all. Indeed, you don't have to run any of it. As I say, my ultra's maximum time worked out at an average walking pace, although it's quite hard to maintain that pace over 50 miles, especially where hills are involved. So in general, it's likely you'll want to jog the flat bits and walk the hilly bits, or jog the road bits and walk the footpath bits, or some other similar combination that maximises the compromise between time and fitness. Now, because of their length and the likelihood to be on trails and footpaths for much of their length, it's unlikely you'll be able to do much of a course recce or even follow the route on Google Street View. So while you can do some map preparation, much of the course will be new to you. Hopefully there won't be too many surprises or awkward bits, like the small but steep hill about 7 miles in on my route that's narrow, uneven with stones, has 3 big stiles on it that are hard to get my leg over properly, and lined on both sides all the way up with barbed wire fencing. For a dyspraxic, that's unpleasant. In addition, because they're usually on public byways and certainly not on designated track, you're going to always have to be aware of traffic, be it hikers, dog walkers, cyclists, horse riders, everyday pedestrians, or just general cars and vans on the road. Indeed, on my Ultra there's a small section just south of Halifax where the route meets a canal and they go straight across a busy road junction, and this is specifically highlighted in the route notes as a place to be particularly aware of. A couple of miles later, you reach a particularly desolate section of moorland, so at least the terrain and the environment is always quite varied. My route took me along forest trails, across vague wilderness, country lanes, through farms, down main roads into villages, and at least 2 designated towns, alongside a canal, on the trackbed of a disused railway line, and through public parks. If there's one thing to say about an ultra, it's certainly not boring. With that in mind, you might wonder how I prepared for my first ultra. The answer, and this isn't a spoiler alert, is not nearly as well as I ought. But I'm sure you wouldn't have expected it any other way. My ultra took place on April the 26th. I signed up for it on the 13th of December, albeit after a couple of weeks of musings and should I or shouldn't I's. Ultimately, though, it was a case of, feck it, why not? Did I have buyer's regret the next day? Sure, but I don't like admitting to making mistakes, so here we are. Through my online running group, I got a 4-weekly training plan that built up over time. It was mainly made up of several do some slowish runs during the week and go for a hike on Sundays. The closer to race day, the longer these hikes were due to be, culminating in 6 to 7 hour ones which were supposed to be taken, as much as possible, on terrain and topography close to that of the ultra itself. As the Calderdale Way itself is walkable from where I live, for a given definition of walkable, I had the rare opportunity to attune myself to the course itself for these hikes. Listener, I did not. Because I was complacent. That's not to say I didn't do anything, of course, because that would have been absurd. I just didn't do all the training jogs on all the days I ought for as long as distance or as time as designated. I would come up with a whole list of excuses, including, we had a miserable winter, weather-wise, and for several of the weeks in the interim the trails were just too icy, or at least too icy and damp for an over-anxious dyspraxic going down a hill. Indeed, I was genuinely concerned that on the day of the race itself the paths would be a bit muddier than I was comfortable with. They were not, but I'll come on to that later. I also had a couple of holidays and weekends away that disrupted my training plans, especially the long Sunday hikes. I did what I could, which was less than what I was able to, let's be honest, but certainly the trip to South Asia in the middle of it didn't help. The purpose behind the training is to ensure your body is used to moving for hours at a time, at a comfortable pace. In fact, my plan used a reference scale I may have mentioned before called Rate of Perceived Excursion, or RPE, and this is a relative and subjective feeling based on what you, yourself, are capable of. So, a 1 would be I could do this literally forever, akin to walking around your home or something, while a 10 would be, if I do this for more than 20 seconds, I think I might die. My general weekday jogs were supposed to be mainly at a 3 or possibly at 4, which is where you're doing some activity but holding a decent conversation isn't too much of an effort, probably akin to a decent walk. Once a week I was supposed to push this up to a 5 or a 6 for 40 minutes or so, which translates as definitely more effort but still able to have a basic chat. And my standard default jogs are more or less this. Kinda, maybe. So I felt that was good enough. One thing I will say though is I find it very difficult to jog slowly. It's not in my nature. If I feel good, I'll want to be moving at the most comfortable pace I feel like, which is not the slightly quicker than walking pace that an ultra demands. On that score, one thing I did do that you might also find useful is to note the distance to and between each of the refreshment stations, and calculate roughly how long it would take to reach each one, based on an end goal time. That is to say, after how many hours you should reach, say, checkpoint 3, if you intended to finish in 12 hours, or 14 hours, or indeed the cut-off time pace. What this does is give you a feel of whether you're going too fast or too slow at specific points, and allow you to change pace accordingly without having to do mental arithmetic on the fly, when you're, low on minerals and energy. That way too I could easily judge my training runs to that pace, finding a route that was about the length required between two of the stops, and see how it feels to run the time in question. I never managed it, of course, but the thought was there. Apart from training, I also had to get the requisite kit. This included buying a pair of designated running shoes. I haven't had proper running shoes for well over a decade, but when I'd done some hiking up the Calderdale Way before I even knew the Ultra existed, I was very conscious of how rocky and easy to roll an ankle on it would be. Far too much to do in minimalist shoes. In any case, I'd also tried both my local park runs by this point, and found that they'd both got awkward trail and stone sections that I'd been having trouble in my skinners with. Plus, of course, the canal, an ideal running route, is very gravelly too, so I knew I'd make other use of them anyway, irrespective of the Ultra itself. A quick conversation with my running group guided me towards a couple of brands of trail shoes designed for off-road running with thinner soles and thick tread, and ankle support, so it was just a case of finding the ones that I felt most comfortable in. And at a shade over £200, it's ironic that the most expensive item of clothing I own are indeed these shoes, but needs must. The rest of the obligatory kit on the list was bought gradually over time, the last of which being the waterproofs, which I knew I'd never use, so I was reluctant to buy them for £70 each from an outdoor store. Anyway, I picked them up from Amazon the week before the race for about £25, and they arrived just in time. The most annoying thing was that the route goes over 2 different ordnance survey maps, so that was something that was going to add extra weight to my bag as well as extra cost. And I wouldn't need to make use of them, right? Because even I can read signposts. Stop rolling your eyes, I can see them from here. The one thing that I apparently didn't need to do in training was any kind of eating plan. I did ask, but apparently they're overrated. As long as I had energy food for the morning and something to keep me going on the route, it didn't seem to matter what I ate and drank during our training regime. It must be said that people following our hike across Great Britain back in 2019 did wonder if we were on the UK's longest possible pub crawl. This is not a recommended plan for an ultra, no matter how much energy and sugar it gives you. The dehydration cancels it out. Plus you'd be weeing a lot. You don't want to do that in public. I'm not quite sure if I remember how I felt on the morning of the race. Quite tired for sure. As always, when you set an alarm for early, it's quite difficult to get to sleep in the first place, so I'm not sure I was fully rested. Not that it would have made a difference, to be honest. My breakfast that morning was very much designed for energy. A couple of cereal bars, some chocolate, and a pint of iron brew. Breakfast of champions. Ultras aren't terribly good for your teeth, for sure. I'd mostly packed my kit the night before, so I wasn't rushed. And the taxi I'd pre-booked came on time. While not the longest taxi ride I'd ever had, it was the most convenient and practical way of getting there, especially at 5:45 a.m. It was just getting light when I arrived at the start, a little chill in the air, but nothing problematic. The weather was forecast to be dry, overcast and temperate, about 12 degrees Celsius, so pretty perfect for a long run. I'd come straight out in my running gear, a t-shirt and funky skort, because life is too short to wear beige. I was also wearing my hat, but I imagined I'd take that off not long after the start. I was one of the first competitors to arrive at the registration desk, a functional yet not terribly aesthetic social club building at the bowling club in Heptonstall. The check-in and registration went without a hitch, and I was given my number and the tracker, a lovely little orange box with flashing lights. They said to keep it on my person rather than in my bag, so it went in the small back pocket of my skort. Over the course of the next hour, it got busier. I didn't get the impression of anything but controlled calm, not even like that before the archetypal storm, just a sense of low-key and functional activity. Maybe everybody was in the zone. Maybe they were all just tired. There weren't terribly many of us. Or at least it didn't feel like it when we were all outside in the slight breeze readying for the off. Maybe 40 to 50? It felt like a small park run. When I looked at the results later, it suggested 47 people took part, and most of them finished. In the run-up to the race, my friends had asked me if I had any targets. My main aim was, simply to finish, and if that meant returning to Hepton Stall at 11:59 and 59 seconds, then so be it. My ideal was to finish before it went dark, so about 14 hours, or failing that, before the pub shut. But of course it was 7 a.m. and I had absolutely no idea what I was capable of. Whatever happened, it was going to be interesting, and I was open to the challenge. I'd walked the first 6 miles some months previously, albeit in the opposite direction, so I knew the start was the best part of a mile downhill. I also knew the second mile was pretty much entirely uphill before the next few miles over the bleak moorland. It was in my head that I shouldn't set off too fast. I shouldn't go careering down the hill just because I was fit and fresh and everybody else was going to. And in fairness, I don't think I did, though I still probably went faster than I had intended to. The section over the moorland was very much walk a bit, jog a bit, walk a bit, jog a bit, which was my plan for the entire race, although because it was more or less flat, I did both at a slightly quicker pace than I'd intended. I felt comfortable towards the rear of the pack, but still surrounded by other runners, and quite ahead of the slowest moving tail. I reached checkpoint 1 at 6.5 miles in at a pace that was quicker than anything I'd planned, less than 12 hours for the total race, and I felt absolutely fine, albeit slightly apprehensive. I was only 12% of the race through. This checkpoint was nothing more than one small table in a car park serving a nature reserve, and I detained myself just long enough to do a quick selfie vid and eat a jelly gummy worm. The hill immediately beyond checkpoint 1 was the first time I felt the strain. It took more out of me than I realised. The first and steepest part was 1,300 metres long with a climb of 170 metres, a 1 in 7 for nearly a mile. That's tough. And once I hit the top, I was just beginning to feel a bit of ache in my legs. This was compounded by the next section being a lot of farmland, and therefore a lot of stiles over the boundary fences. I'm not much cop at stiles at the best of times. When faced with them on steep hills, I was less than impressed. And they felt never-ending. This did at least reach the highest point of the course, about 10 miles. It would be wrong to think that it's downhill all the way from here, although certainly the lowest point would be reached in another 10.5 miles, so I was spared too many more steep climbs in the near future. That said, another short climb up a service road at about 12.5 miles threw me completely out of step. We weren't even supposed to be there. I was jogging with 2 others on the road and we missed the sign directing us to a footpath, so ended up going down a very welcome hill, only to realise we had to go back up it again. The effort from doing that knocked me enough so that the people I'd been jogging with for the past 10 miles or so just casually strolled on ahead, and in the next mile to the next checkpoint, I gradually lost sight of them. This was the first real moment when I felt I might just have overestimated my abilities. Checkpoint 2 was a couple of makeshift tables at a sharp road junction in a small village, where the volunteers were noting the chaotic driving from some of the cars going round the bends. I stayed here a while to catch my breath and get some juice back into my legs. At this point my speed had slowed, so I was now on course for about a 13-hour finish. Just prior to the checkpoint, I'd stopped for a wee chat with a gaggle of hikers who were impressed that people were even attempting to run the whole length of the Calderdale Way. They were just doing one section of it for a Saturday morning amble. The combined rest did me wonders, and I was soon on my way again. This time, however, I was very much on my own. The people I'd been following had long disappeared ahead, and the people behind me had only just arrived when I made to leave. This proved problematic, as I managed to quickly go awry, heading right instead of left where the paths diverged, and quickly finding myself on an unexpected country lane. This, though, was no biggie, as a quick glance on my map showed me a quick way to get back on track, only adding a couple of 100 metres or so to my journey. One very minor error in 13 miles? That's reasonable, I'd say. Just before mile 15, I reached the fabulously named hamlet of Stone Chair, named so because it has a stone chair by the crossroads. It's a suburb of the village of Shelf, which lies on a flat plain partway up the hill from Halifax to Bradford. Further up the hill, is the hamlet of Top Shelf. It was here that I got overtaken by a lady who helps organise the race, but this year decided to take part. It was nice to have a bit of company for a few miles, and we chatted a bit, walked a bit, jogged a bit, and relished the more urban scenery of villages and easier pavements, rather than steep farmland and earthen pathways. It didn't end well, as the inevitable happened. But that seems like a good place to take a break in this episode. Hello! It's time for a mid-episode break. Half-time, 7th inning stretch, that sort of thing. Put the kettle on, grab a snack, get comfortable. I'm just here to remind you ways in which you can get in touch and help this podcast out. You probably know this already, but in case you don't. The best way of supporting this podcast is to join my Patreon. For as little as a pint of beer at Wetherspoons every month, you can get a shout-out on this podcast, get occasional exclusive content, and other benefits. This podcast is going places, and wouldn't you want to say you were there before it was cool? The Patreon link can be found at patreon.com/TravelTalesBeyondBrochurePod, and it's also in the show notes. The second best way is to appear on the pod yourself. If you sign up to my newsletter, you'll be able to see what episodes are being planned and see which you'd like to contribute a voice recording for. It's also a great way to keep in contact if and when the social medias undergo a lingering heat death. Newsletters should come out in the first week of each month, and sign-ups can be found at barefoot-backpacker.us14.list-manage.com/subscribe. There's another link in the show notes, in case that was a bit wordy. I'm a big fan of promoting fellow content creators and podcasters. If you've got a podcast or vlog trailer you'd like to hear featured in this spot, drop it to me and get yourself heard around the world.
Barefoot Festival is all about getting back to the basics, feeling the grass between your toes and taking a break from the pressures of modern life. Try something new, spend quality time with your loved ones, and meet new friends. We are Leicestershire's best kept secret, with no corporate sponsors. Barefoot Festival is a grassroots gathering with big festival vibes and atmosphere. Enjoy stars overhead, fresh air, great company, and a communal campfire. From fantastic music and amazing workshops to a wide variety of activities and performances, we have something for everyone. Expect a range of unique experiences, from capoeira and Bollywood dance routines to shamanic drumming circles and hula hooping. You can take part in yoga, sound baths and breathing ceremonies. Our forest school and bushcraft area offer great experiences for kids, and our amazing cabaret show hosted by the sensational Tallulah Blue will leave you in awe. We also have on-site massage therapists and healers, fantastic festival food from all around the globe, fair trade crafts, fully licensed bar, and plenty of chill spaces to relax. The event is intimate, yet bursting with energy and life. We can't wait to see you all dancing barefoot in the sunshine this summer.
So I'm here, right where you left me, jogging slowly along a section of tarmacked farm road, going just slightly downhill. It was at a shade before the 19-mile mark, and I don't know how I managed it, other than I never know how I manage it. I just do it, like a kind of magical curse. I tripped over and fell, knocking my glasses off and grazing my left knee and palm badly enough for them to both be bleeding a little. I felt otherwise fine, if a bit knocked about, but certainly in the initial movements afterwards it felt a bit stiff, and of course I was very wary of it happening again. I am naturally prone to doing this, and it was always on my mind, especially on the rockier sections, so to do it on a smooth road with nothing to even trip on felt quite on brand. It was 2 miles to checkpoint 3, and I told the person I was jogging with I'd probably just walk there and assess how I felt when I got there. I was a little worried that it would get worse, or at least prove uncomfortable, and I'd end up having to drop out already. Checkpoint 3 was at the lowest part of the course, 21.5 miles in, at a bridge on the canal just beyond the town of Brighouse. It was quite a big checkpoint, with several tables, lots of bottles of water, and even a couple of vans. I washed my bruises, and one of the volunteers even had a little antiseptic cream, so I was patched up quite well. I stayed a while longer here than I'd have hoped, and my estimated time had dropped to finish quite considerably to around 14.5 hours, and I knew I was getting slower with each mile. but I wanted to make sure I was feeling okay to move on. And to be honest, I was. On the long hill leaving checkpoint 3, it was fine. I felt quite comfortable. I was on my own, the air was calm, I felt relatively okay myself, and the path was lined all the way with verges of bluebells. I had a minor infraction when I followed what I thought was the trail into a field of sheep where I got stuck. I could see the path I needed to be on, but it was on the other side of the wall, and the drop on that far side was just too high for me to manage to climb over. It only cost me a couple of minutes to wander back and find an easier drop, and I had hoped it would be the last of my misadventures. Listener, it was not. Near the top of the hill, the path turned left, passing the south side of the village of Sutherham, and on west towards the canal at Salterhebble. The path did this. I did not. Instead, I followed what was a designated long-distance footpath on the map that went to the top of the hill, turned right along a road, and then left into what was evidently some kind of building site in a field, with a noted diversion to the footpath that worked until it dumped me out into 2 large fields at the back of some houses, with no obvious way to get through. The marked path itself was lost in the works. I meandered around both fields trying to get through for maybe 20 minutes until a couple of older hikers came by and I asked for directions. They seemed to be about as confused as I was, but together we took a path through some woodland and out the other side, on the northeast side of Sutherham. I looked at the map, somewhat confused, until I realised the Calderdale Way was not the only long-distance path in the area, and had actually been following the Brickhouse Boundary Walk, a footpath I had never heard of before and was not expecting to see. While making my way back to the south bit of Sutherham, I was contacted by the race admin by phone, who just wanted to check that I was okay, because I'd clearly gone out askew on the tracker map. I assured her that I was. I just had a bit of frustration, and I was happy that I was now going the right way, just rather embarrassed. I'd lost the best part of an hour and added at least 2 miles to my overall journey. The chances of making the cut-off at checkpoint 5 were slipping with every step. But it wasn't going to happen again, and I was confident that things would be fine from here on in. This state of affairs lasted not quite 2 miles. Between Sutherham and Salterhebble, the path went past a private country house and through some woodland. I did not see a sign saying I should immediately turn right, so I blithely followed the main route through Elland Woods and ended up being dumped out in an industrial estate next to the canal, which it turns out was about 1.5 miles downstream of where I should have been. This thus dropped me yet another 30 to 45 minutes behind where I should have been, and I was very frustrated by now. Partly with the lack of obvious and visible signage en route to show where the Calderdale Way itself went. But let's be honest, a lot of the blame can be fairly placed on someone who can read maps, but chooses not to because they assume that everything's fine unless shown otherwise. At least my diversion was flat, which is more than can be said for the route when I finally made it back on track. By now, I was absolutely convinced I was going to time out anyway at checkpoint 5, so I kind of stopped caring, I was more interested in enjoying the view and thinking about what I'd already achieved regardless of the final outcome. I was very much like, well, I've done an ultra now. It might not be this ultra, but I can at least say I've done over a marathon distance. And as a result, I slowed down. It wasn't that I wasn't capable of keeping the pace, just that I didn't really see the point of overexerting myself. I realised I'd probably not even make it to checkpoint 5 within the cut-off time, to be honest, and since checkpoint 5 was in the back of beyond at the end of a road on the moorlands, whereas checkpoint 4 was very close to a named village with a bus route, Ripponden, while I kind of told myself I'd just get to the next checkpoint to make a final decision there, I was pretty certain I knew what was going to happen. After walking up a very steep hill in what looked like a small mining village, then walking along a ridge on the edge of a wood, which was very pretty, I made it to a farm and then on to Norland Moor Nature Reserve. At this point I was cross-checking with my friends on the Queer Running Discord server, who were tracking my progress, that I was still on the right trail, and they gave me some nice reassurance that not only was I, but that the next checkpoint was only a couple of miles away on the other side of the moor. The path through the moor was pretty flat and well defined, but everything just looked bleak and brown, and quite reflective of my mood at this point. I'm not saying I wanted it to end, I'm just saying I wanted to get to the sanctity of checkpoint 4 and rest for a bit for the irk of my attempt to get there from checkpoint 3. Partway through the moor, I was met by one of the volunteers because apparently my tracker wasn't registering properly and they wanted to make sure that I was all right. I ended up walking with her to the checkpoint, which officially was just beyond 30 miles, despite the fact that at this point I'd probably manually ran 34 or so. I got there a shade before 6 p.m. Checkpoint 5 was some 6 to 7 miles away and the cut-off time was 7 p.m. anyway, so even if I got there, that would be the end of my race. Checkpoint 4 was a couple of tables in a wide farm garage and had a good array of sweets and drinks. I sat down and decided enough was enough. As it turns out, I was the last person on the course at this point, so once I'd made my peace with whatever divine being was looking on with resignation, the volunteers and organisers started packing away their stuff into cars. And that's how I managed to get a lift directly back to my flat with them, because it was more or less on their way back to the HQ at Heptonstall. I'll talk about how I felt mentally having finished the race later, but I just wanted to mention a little about how I felt physically afterwards. One of the unwritten rules about ultras is, no matter how you feel during a race, no matter how much you want to rest at the checkpoints, no matter how convenient it is when you're having your energy drink and officially sanctioned gummy bears, you don't sit down. Because if you sit down, if you stop moving, your body goes, that's better, and it makes it exponentially harder to stand up and start running again. While my body was struggling in the final stages, I was at least still moving. When I got to the checkpoint and knew I was done, I sat down. It was a purposeful move designed to tell my body, yep, you're right, it's over. And the ladies at the checkpoint who gave me a lift back to my flat, that act of getting into their car itself proved tricky, because even though I hadn't been moving for only about 5 to 10 minutes, my leg muscles they'd crashed. They simply did not want to bend like that anymore. I got home, I lay on my bed for a bit, and then I decided to have a bath. I don't know if the bath helped or hindered. What I do know is that I had the most trouble I'd ever had getting out of one. I didn't have the body strength to crouch, hold on to the bath sides and pull myself up without my legs hurting. It was slightly embarrassing. I was very tempted to message Laura and go, hey, I'm kind of stuck, but that would have been awkward for both of us. Anyway, 5 minutes of struggle, 1 flooded bathroom and 2 water-soaked mobile phones later, I managed to somehow clamber out. Let me tell you, it was not a comfortable manoeuvre, nor a particularly aesthetic one. Laura had plans to go walking to the supermarket on the Sunday, about 3 miles each way, and even before the run we'd already expected that I would not be joining her. And indeed, when it came to it, I would have been barely able to walk to the end of the road. To be honest though, I think I recovered reasonably quickly. I could walk again by Monday evening and jog normally by the Wednesday. Also, the main issue I had was with my thigh muscles. Aside from those, and just general fatigue and exhaustion, which you'd expect from having run 30 miles, I didn't have any other aches, pains or injuries, aside from, the scar on my left knee from having fallen over, but that was never going to have stopped me moving in the long run. My only other post-race problems were to do with food and drink, and I'll talk more about that in the next section. However, one of my other learnings would be that one marvellous item to keep handy following severe exercise like this would be milk. This has 4 benefits. It's easy to drink and soothes the throat. It's a nice comfort food. I am particularly fond of chocolate milkshakes, as they feel rich and decadent, even if it's just Aldi own brand chocolate milk in a cardboard carton. It's a good texture for the stomach, not acidic, not strong, not spicy, not sharp, and mainly because it's a really easy way to take in protein that you need to replenish your body with. And for all you slightly more sex-minded people, yes, sucking on that would probably work as well. So, food. Now, I'm going to hit you with 2 stats about energy, calories and intake. When I did my hike across Great Britain in 2019, although over all the 57 days we hiked, I think only 1 could have been regarded as ultra length, and even that was flatter than my attempts doing ABBA karaoke, it was comparable in the sense that I was doing a very long distance without any returning to my standard life. Becky calculated that I'd probably need to consume about 5,600 calories a day in order to break even. That I did not explains why I had to buy new trousers in Peebles on day 43. Obviously, overall, that was a much greater producer of effort than the average ultra, especially given that we were carrying far more gear, but it does give an idea of how much energy is needed to tackle even just one day of tough walking and jogging. Now, while there's no hard and fast rule, as every ultra is different in terms of length, elevation profile and mandatory gear, and therefore total energy consumed per mile, the general consensus online, and by online I mean Reddit, suggests that you'll burn between 100 and 125 calories per hour. So to counterbalance this and to make sure you're giving yourself the best energy and effort you possibly can, they suggest you'll want to consume 200 to 300 calories every hour. This sounds a lot easier than it is. Now, I went into this race the same way I went into the hike, which was loading up on protein bars, on beef jerky, on things with nuts in. Basically food that packs a lot of energy and protein into a small space, making it easy to carry, but also something that wouldn't melt as I went around. Chocolate is great energy food, but I, personally, really hate soft and squidgy chocolate bars, and I didn't want to get halfway round and found I was eating something that oozed warm. As noted earlier, the checkpoints will have some array of food and drink, but you shouldn't rely on these stations to meet your calorie deficit, no matter how good that slice of Victoria sponge cake looks after 13 miles. In addition, regardless of how fast you're going, it is a run, or at least a jog, and you don't want to have digestive issues as you go. You don't want to feel things sloshing around inside your stomach, and you certainly don't want to eat or drink anything that's going to require, or which causes, toilet issues. I mean, sure, on an ultra through the countryside provides plenty of remote shelter for you to do your business if you really need to. You really don't want the hassle of disposing it all correctly and in accordance with local regulations. On another note, you don't want to eat or drink anything that's going to make you feel ill en route. There's nothing worse than being 5 miles from the next checkpoint and feel like you want to suddenly throw up. Or, worse, faint. Turns out, in my experience anyway, an ultra is a bit different to a hike. The problem I had with all my food was, while the principle was sound, it's all incredibly dry. Jerky and cereal bars take an awful lot of chewing. I did not realise how difficult this simple task would be after 10 miles, never mind 25. You need more liquid than you think you do, and that's without factoring in dehydration along the way. My ultra took place in almost ideal conditions. Low teens Celsius, patchy grey skies, slight breeze. In the middle of summer, you're really going to feel it more. But remember, water itself doesn't have calories, so while it'll make your body work better, it won't give you the energy boost you need, which is why most of the checkpoints will have copious amounts of probably quite flat and very cheap cola or other pop. Additionally, what I didn't realise, and what no one told me, was that because of the action of breathing hard so much for so long, your mouth gets irritated and starts to hurt, mainly the upper back of the throat area. By checkpoint 3, even the very act of swallowing became slightly painful, and that included water and the cheap cola. I had to suck on orange segments because they were about the only thing that I could physically eat. And I hate orange. That's how irksome it was. When I got back and had my evening meal, I made sure it was something soft and almost melty. It was a bowl of overcooked noodles. Even that took about half an hour longer to eat than it normally would. Some members of my queer running group are fond of the energy gels that you can get from running and outdoor suppliers. I've never had them, but essentially they are, well, one of them described gels as like goo in a packet, and they vary in consistency from water to jelly to baby food. You just tear a corner off and squeeze them right into your mouth. They're an easy way to access carbs and sugars, and can vary too in how slowly the energy is released. They come in many different flavours and brands, and there's some debate over the accuracy of their energy content, but that's a tale for a dedicated running podcast. Another disadvantage with them is that many of them are very sweet, and that can be off-putting to the point of distaste. Conversely, one spine race competitor apparently fueled his entire run with Haribo sweets, specifically Tang Fast Sticks. Cue a horde of 8-year-olds complaining to their parents, "If it's good enough for Jack Scott, it's good enough for me." One interesting thing that I wasn't expecting was that at no point on the race, nor much afterwards, did I feel like I needed to go to the toilet. No matter how much food and juice I was pushing into my body all day, I didn't ever want to pee. And even when I did, back at home, it was clear I was quite dehydrated. So, you've DNF'd. And honestly, that's fine. Several people have collated did not finish stats across different types of ultras. iRunFar website did some work on 100 milers in 2023 and noted that the average DNF rate in their sample was 38%, with most races seeing a 30 to 50% DNF rate. The most common reason for DNFs were injury, cut-off time, and got sick. Note too, some ultras are designed for failure. The most famous of these, the Barkley Marathons in Tennessee, is 5 loops of 20-ish miles to be completed within 60 hours. And it's not flat. To be fair, there's a whole weird mythology and concept around that particular race, but since its inauguration in 1986, and with only between 30 to 40 competitors per event, it's seen only 20 different people finish it. 3 people have completed it more than once. That's one heck of a DNF rate. It's also not clear how many people DNF their first ultra. Honestly, though, that's got to be a high number. It's not like a park run where you could literally crawl backwards around and still make it. Well, don't do that, you'll annoy the race director and the tail walker, but you know what I mean. 5Ks are hard if you're not used to even walking that distance, and honestly the gap between couch and 5K is, mentally and physically, harder than that between 5K and 50 miles. But it's 5K. Relatively, it's not that far, and even if it takes you 2 hours, it's still only 2 hours. Mentally, 5 kilometres is definable, measurable, visualable. Likewise, an hour is a comfortable time to think about. It's a podcast. It's an episode of your favourite stream drama series. The cut-off time for the Calderdale Way Ultra, lest we forget, was 17 hours. That's more than the total extended editions of the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy. That's more than pretty much most flights in the entire world. It's a long time, and it's a long way. Obviously, the Calderdale Way Ultra isn't an ideal first ultra. Honestly, though, it does have a couple of advantages. The cut-off times are quite generous. It's not that well known, so it's not going to be sold out immediately on ticket release, and it's not one that has any entry requirements. It's also only about 50 miles, so when it comes to ultras, this is tending towards the shorter end. For every 32-mile canal run, there seem to be 5 or 10 100Ks or 100 milers. But regardless of length, it's still an achievement to finish. It could be the easiest, flattest, smoothest 26 miles, 386 yard race you could find, but it's still an ultra and you still have to do it in order to finish it. And while I'm not saying you should go into it expecting to fail, I mean, even I didn't go into this expecting to fail, it's absolutely not a failure if you do. Even the greatest, most respected international ultramarathoners DNF every so often, for all manner of reasons. And even they say it's nothing to be afraid of. It's just something that happens. On a more personal level, Laura was worried I'd go into a funk because I'd failed, because she knows I have a very bad relationship with failure. I get all introspective and negative and end up writing whole podcast episodes on it because it's cheaper than therapy. But I have to say, that's not what happened here, not in the slightest. I think partly it was because it was such a new experience for me that I didn't have any expectation on it at all. As I say, I had a couple of targets in mind, but I never pushed myself far enough before in my life in this way to know if those targets were realistic, or if they were anything more than filling in a blank space in my mind so that if anyone asked me, I had a ready-made answer. Did I think I could finish? Of course. Did I think I would finish? That is a different question, and my answer, I think, would definitely have been along the lines of, we will see what happens. I knew it would be hard. I knew it would be tough. But equally I knew that I was never more than 7 miles from home, so ultimately it wouldn't be mentally problematic if something did go wrong, or if I did have to pull out or something, because it wasn't like I'd have to travel halfway across the country to ruminate on my failure. I could just hop on a bus and go to the Wetherspoons in Selby Bridge or something. And in truth, I probably knew what was going to happen long before I'm prepared to admit. Honestly, the falling over at 19 miles was the point at which I knew I wasn't going to finish. From that moment on, it was just a case of seeing how far I could push myself before the inevitable. The 2 huge getting off track moments either side of the village of Sutherham that cost me a total of maybe 4 miles and at least an hour probably an hour and a half, really sealed the deal so that by the time I hit the checkpoint in Ripponden, I was very comfortable with calling it a day. Without those diversions, I could have made it to checkpoint 5 within the cut-off time, and honestly, given that checkpoint 5 is on the moors and nowhere particularly convenient, I would probably have been able to push myself all the way to Todmorden and checkpoint 6, at which point I'd have gone, you know what, it's getting dark, last section's horribly uphill, I've more than achieved my base goals, thank you and good night. But even as it is, I made it over halfway round. I technically did an ultra, given I passed the 26.21 mile mark. Indeed, officially I hit over 30 miles, and that's without the unplanned extra mileage. And I didn't die. I'd call that a win. Or at least a sensible score draw. When I got home, I didn't wallow in could-have-beens. Rather the opposite. I felt deflated, but in a good way. It wasn't the, oh, I'm sad because I failed. Rather it was a, well, that's a thing I have done. I feel a little empty now because it's over, because that's what I was preparing myself for and waiting for, and now it's no longer in my life, so it's almost like there's a hole there. So an emptiness, but a positive emptiness in a way. I can certainly see why people who do these things, and the same is true for holidays as well actually, why people book the next big thing immediately after doing the thing, the day they come back from holiday, the day after doing an Ironman, the day after performing on stage. Because it gives them a thrill and gives them something to aim for, to achieve. Listener, I did not. Though having said which, it may have been the Sunday, it may have been the Monday, but I did see on my Instagram stories feed very soon afterwards the organisers posting a story that said, entries are now open for the 2026 Calderdale Way Ultra. We'll see. I will say, though, that 2 months have now passed since I did the race, and that's given me enough time to ruminate on my lessons learned, and on whether I actually enjoyed it, or whether this was a one-off piece of masochism and that I should stick to parkrun. And I was browsing races later this year, around September-October time, looking for a half marathon or a 10-miler, something that I could knock off without too much prep and which would get me properly into the swing of longer races, building myself up so that if I ever do an ultra again, I'm far more prepared for it. It may not surprise you in the slightest to know that what I actually found was a 30-mile ultra in Northumberland, that when I broached the subject of with my friends, and not just my runner friends either, they all said, why would you not enter this? Because this time I'd know what I was letting myself in for. In fairness, it's much flatter because it's along the coast. There's like one hill at the 7-mile mark, and the whole thing has less elevation gain than most of the individual sections of the Calderdale Way Ultra. Anyway, it's in mid-September, and I've booked everything already. I did have a jump scare moment when booking it, though. There's a list of entrants on the website, and everyone's listed with an age and gender segment. I can enter as a non-binary athlete, labelled as X rather than M or F, and as of the time of writing this pod, I'm the only NB to have entered. That's not the jump scare moment. Rather, my category is XV50. I looked at that. My immediate thought was, oh my God, I've entered my birthday incorrectly. I had not entered my birth date incorrectly. Rather, this race is in September, after my next birthday. And I forgot that this upcoming birthday puts my age into a new decade. God damn it. There's one thing about an ultra that I don't think many people talk about, but which I've been pondering about vaguely on and off for a while, and that's about accessibility. I don't mean disabled access here. By their very nature, many ultras take place on trails that are in parts barely suitable for fit and able-bodied people that are absolutely not geared up for wheelchairs, although many runners do use hiking poles, so some mobility aids would be absolutely fine, and there would be they'd be a challenge for visually impaired runners. Rather, though, by accessibility, I mean more issues of affordability, class and privilege. The Calderdale Way Ultra was around £60. The Pilgrim Ultra I'm doing in September in Northumberland is £70. I didn't need the provided transport for the Calderdale Way, but for the Pilgrim Ultra there's a bus ride from the finish to the start. It's a point-to-point route and the start is on Lindisfarne or Holy Island, and that's a pig of a place to get to if you don't drive. That transport is an additional £20. Then, for runners who aren't local to the race, there's additional costs of travel and accommodation. Again, with the Pilgrim Ultra, I'll have to take trains up to Alnmouth, buses and taxis while I'm up there, and the pub I'm staying in for 2 nights is at the cheaper end, and even that's £100 a night. So, for the pleasure of running 30 miles along the Northumberland coast, I'm spending close to £400 on the admin and logistics alone. I could go away for 2 nights on a city break and find that a flight and accommodation come in at half that. Then there's the costs of the mandatory kit. Now obviously if you're a seasoned ultra runner, you'll already have most of it, like the waterproofs, the water bottles, maybe even the snack food and the gels, which aren't cheap in and of themselves anyway, the whistle, etc. But if you're new to it, you'll have to get it all from scratch, knowing that you won't even ever need to use most of it. And these are at the lower end of races in terms of prestige and provenance, the entry-level ones, the local hippie festivals in comparison with the Glastonburys, the seeing Busted in concert at Halifax Peace Hall compared with seeing Taylor Swift at Anfield Stadium. In comparison, the Spine Race, the one up the Pennine Way and one of the most prestigious ultras in the UK, costs £950 to enter and has qualifying requirements, which means to even be considered for entry, you're going to have done another couple of long ultras first. So it all adds up. Now obviously, if you're in the Spine Race bubble, the chances are you've already skilled up enough to be the target market for sponsors, which helps. But getting to that stage requires a lot of effort and a lot more cash for very little reward. It's not like, if you win the Spine Race, you're going to be a household name or anything. And with the Spine Race in particular, it's a lot of money to shell out without knowing you'll even pass the first checkpoint, given cut-off times and just general fitness and health concerns. Like in the last summer Spine Race, 3 people dropped out at checkpoint 1 at Hebden Bridge, 46 miles in, while in the most recent winter Spine Race, 4 people pulled out at Torside, which is only 5 hours and 17 miles in. That's a very quick exit for the price. It works out a cost of around £55 a mile. Not even TfL get away with that kind of rate. It's not just about money in the race itself either. Obviously, if you enter an ultra, you'll want to feel like you can finish it, even if you're fully accepting that you probably won't in practice. But this means you'll have to do the training. And as you heard earlier, parts of my training plan were to have me do 6 to 7 hour hikes on Sundays. I just wonder how many people can realistically take that amount of time out of their day to do that, especially if you don't live in an area that's conducive to hiking in the first place. I'm quite lucky at the moment in the sense that I live in the hills. There's plenty of places I can just wander quite easily. But if you're living in the middle of, Croydon or Brooklyn, you've got to get to somewhere first. It's basically a whole day out of your schedule once a week, and that's not realistic for most people, I don't imagine. And that's just that one day. The training schedule also has you out for maybe an hour at least 3 other times in an average week. You really have to have a lifestyle that allows for that much free time. Essentially, it feels by their very nature that ultras are mainly undertaken by people with enough privilege to have the time and the money to do them. It is, very definitely, quite a middle-class hobby. So that's how not to run an ultramarathon. If, for some reason, any of this has inspired you to go out there and do better, what are the main lessons learned that you can take, if nothing else? Well, take training seriously, even if you do intend to walk most of it. Do not go off too fast, and do not be influenced by those around you. Make sure you can read a map, and that you can follow signposts and directions. Drink more water, or more flat pop and soda. Don't wait until you're thirsty. It'll be too late by then. Related, take food that's easy to eat, while still providing energy. It is a great shame that I dislike bananas. Most importantly, choose your race carefully and take your ability level seriously. Don't just go with the first you see because you think it will be fun. And remember, when all's said and done, it's okay to fail, it's okay to struggle, and it's okay to do stupid things like this for the crack and the stories it brings. And, so for me, this was the story about how I tried to run 50 miles, underestimated everything, fell over, got lost at least thrice, could barely eat for a day afterwards, and still, somehow, didn't regret a single stupid minute of it. Well, that's about all for this pod. Tune in next time for another adventure beyond the brochure. Until then, remember, if you're going to make a terrible decision like I did, at least make it entertaining. And if you're feeling off colour, keep on getting better. Thank you for listening to this episode of Travel Tales from Beyond the Brochure. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, tell your friends that I rocked your socks. If you wear socks while listening to my pod, that's your call, not mine. And don't forget to leave a review on your podcast site of choice. You can tweet me at RTWBarefoot, and I'm the same name on YouTube, Blue Sky and Pinterest, or you can find me as Barefoot Backpacker on Instagram, Discord and Facebook. Don't forget to sign up for my newsletter, and if you really like what I do, you can slip me the cost of a beer through my Patreon in return for access to rare extra content. Travel Tales from Beyond the Brochure was written, presented, edited and produced by the Barefoot Backpacker. The theme music is Walking Barefoot on Grass Bonus by Kai Engel, which is available via the Free Music Archive and used under the Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 International License. Show notes are available on my website, barefoot-backpacker.com. Until next time, have safe journeys. Bye for now.